Well, hello there, my friendly acquaintances. Thank you for joining me today. I have a special guest, Mr. Kevin Comer. He's an attorney specializing in business. He's in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we're going to be talking business. We're going to be doing a series on what you need to take into consideration when starting a business. And I'm not talking about if you're just raking leaves or shoveling snow, but if you're actually going to start like a real business and accept real money, there are things that you have to think about. So, Mr. Kevin Comer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, George. It's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to our time together today and explain some things to help people out when they start their own businesses.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you went into working with business. There's so many things you can go into in law, and you chose a business area.
Well, I went to law school about 20 years ago. I actually graduated from law school, then I moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. There was a girl involved, and I ended up working there for a couple of years, and then the girl ended, and I moved back to the United States. And I ended up working at a firm that represented a lot of small businesses. This was during the financial crisis that started in 2008. So unfortunately, we ended up doing a lot of bankruptcy work. And in the bankruptcy cases, I did a lot of research into, why did these companies go bankrupt? And in a lot of cases, it was because they were undercapitalized or they didn't have the right setup. They really didn't. A lot of people really didn't know what they were doing, and they suddenly ended up with a couple of $100,000 in debt that they simply couldn't handle. And so with that, I became very interested in helping people set up businesses because, there is a method you want to use when you set up a business. And I know a lot of people, when they set up businesses, they're still working their regular job, their regular 9-to-5 job. And if you don't get off to a good start in setting up the legal system and setting up, getting an accountant, making sure all of the documents are filed with the government every year, it can really lead to problems later.
If somebody wants to start a business, and I've been talking to my audience for years now about side hustles and even scalable side hustles, things that might actually lead to full-time work or a career. And rather than just taking cash for the side hustles, someone really wants to start paying their mortgage and they want to change careers and they want to quit their full-time job and do their own thing. They need to protect themselves. They need to set up something. Tell us about that.
What people should do once they get a certain level of business coming in, it's hard to say what this level of business is, but if you've got, say, at least $1,000 a month coming in, there are tax advantages to setting up your own corporation. And I would recommend an LLC to start out with. The advantage of an LLC is that you can deduct your business expenses from the income you bring in. And the business expenses are actually very broadly defined. They can be things like internet, mileage, if you have to drive for your business, things like going to events. If you have to do some, say, for instance, if you go out to social events every week to advertise your business, that can be a business expense. So there are a lot of advantages to having a corporate structure, even if you're only bringing in $1,000 a month, because once you get the corporate structure set up and get a good accountant, there are a lot of options for keeping your taxes down and for transferring some of your expenses to the business. One of the things I would also really recommend is getting an accountant. An accountant will help you do these things. I know a lot of people, don't want to pay the $500 for an accountant to help prepare the LLC taxes. If you set up an LLC, you have to file taxes for that, and then you will take whatever profit and loss from the LLC and transfer it over to your personal taxes. And I know a lot of people think that's extra time and effort, but a good accountant will make that worthwhile for you and allow you to save money in the long run. So I would say the first two steps people should take is, one, look into setting up an LLC in their state. This can almost always be done online. It's not that expensive. There are all sorts of websites people can look at to do it. It's nothing very complicated for a basic LLC. But once the LLC is set up, you'd want to make sure you exactly log all your income and expenses for that. Go to a bank and set up a bank account for the business. That way you'll be able to get credit cards for the business. You'll probably be personally liable for the credit cards, which means that if you don't pay them, the corporation is on the hook, but you personally are on the hook. But getting a corporate credit card is a great way to start building up the business credit. So once you set up a bank account, get an accountant, get a credit card, maybe get some checks. I know checks are very old-fashioned now, but checks can be very useful to have. Once you get all of that set up, you write off a lot of those expenses. And also in practice, once you have all that set up, people take you more seriously. It's easier to get clients when people see that you have an LLC, you have checks, you have a bank account with your company. That makes it just so much, it gives you a lot of credibility and makes it easier to get new clients. I'm a big believer in, credit cards are great. Depending on how much business expenses you have per month, you can get points credit cards and get free airline and hotel stays from the points. Often at the beginning, people only have a few $100s a month in bills for their business. But once you establish keeping your records separate, you don't want to commingle personal and business funds. Once you actually start a habit and a system of paying your business expenses separately, it makes your life easier in the long run. But it also establishes that it'll help you establish the situation where you can get credit for your business down the road too. Because if several years go by, you start thinking about you want to quit your job and start this new job, start your own business. You've already got a track record of accomplishment and saying, we brought in this much over this many years. This is our growth rate. If you needed to get a bank loan, for instance, or an SBA loan, which can often be a great opportunity for people, they look for things like, what is your track record? What sort of records do you have? How long have you been in business and have been keeping these records? If you establish getting the bank account, getting the credit card, having the accountant get involved from the very beginning, that'll make your ability to expand that much easier, because it gives you that track record of running a business, which is going along with all the rules, complies with the IRS rules, especially if you want to get an SBA loan. SBA loans are often an amazing opportunity for people. You have to have all of the paperwork going back several years before you can get that SBA loan. You can get that SBA loan.
Okay. So what is the role of a business attorney? Now we know what the role of an accountant is. The accountant sets up the LLC, or does someone like you set that up?
I can often set up the LLC. Setting up the LLC is not that complicated. I think in most cases, people can do it themselves, but often they want an attorney to handle it to make sure there aren't any mistakes. I set up LLCs all the time. But the LLC paperwork tends to be pretty straightforward. You'll send the paperwork into the state. It's a couple of $100s in most cases. Once you file the paperwork, you'll get something called an EIN number from the IRS. You can get this online. It's generated immediately during business hours. But essentially what my role is to help people get the business started. And then if there are problems that come up along the way, I can help out with those. But I often just am around at the beginning of a business just to be there as a helping hand in order to answer questions, deal with common situations that come up, and things like that. Just being an old experienced hand who's been there before and knows what's likely to happen.
What are the biggest pitfalls, the biggest legal pitfalls that people have when starting a business?
Probably the biggest pitfalls are not doing the proper paperwork. There are certain businesses where you need insurance to do the business. I mean, even if you're a handyman or a subcontractor, insurance is almost always required in these cases. A lot of people don't know this or don't know what sort of insurance they need. It can be essentially impossible to get good work, for instance, as a subcontractor, unless you have the proper documents. And subcontractors, it's a very common job and first business for people to set up. There's always lots of demand for handyman services and being able to work a couple of days a week on building sites. That's something I often encourage men who have a lot of manual ability and an ability with their hands and with the machines to go into. I mean, there's always a demand for that. It pays very well, but it only pays well if you have the correct documents.
As far as growing a business, what kind of relationship does a small business owner have to have with his business attorney as the business is growing?
I mean, I like to, and I have any number of small companies that I'm working with. I like to just, talk to them every month, even if it's only a brief conversation, see what's going on, see how the business is growing, see if they're having any problems. I can often recommend people in my network, for instance, if they want to build a website, I know people who can do that. If they want to start doing some web advertising, I can direct them to some people with that. If they need to meet someone in, city hall or talk to planning or to get permits, I can help out with that. So it's more of just establishing a long-term relationship and seeing what their needs are. It's not necessarily legal work in the sense of I have to prepare documents for court. That's obviously always a last case scenario. You don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. You never want to be in a position where that does happen. But being a part of a larger community and a larger network is key to growing any business, whether it's online, whether it's a business, a brick and mortar, not even a brick and mortar business, but a business which requires your presence locally. And problems always pop up. That's true in life, it's true in business. And oftentimes these problems are both easy to solve if you know how to solve them, but extremely difficult to manage if you don't know how to solve them. And that's, I think, my key role in the early days of a business is just saying, okay, this issue has come up. This is who you need to talk to. This is an easy fix, but the business owner doesn't know it's an easy fix because it's their first business and they've never seen this issue before.
You are almost acting as a business growth consultant at times. That's like one of the hats that you wear.
Oh, absolutely. And it's really rewarding to see people's businesses grow. I work with a lot of local small businesses, bars, restaurants, construction companies. I mean, businesses of all sorts, airports, printers, garbage men, people who do waste management. Essentially any business you can think of, we've worked with in the last 15 years.
Is your practice just limited to Florida, or can you give general business advice to people anywhere in the country?
I give advice to people all over the country. I often have questions from people in other states. In most cases, I can handle these because they're straightforward questions. If it's more complicated or involves a lawsuit, in that case, I can get a local attorney involved. I've a very good network around the country, but I would say probably 80% of the questions I get from around the country, I can handle myself and get an answer to them within a day or so.
The minute that somebody wants to take their business a little bit further, like you said, they're making more than $1,000 a month and they want to scale it, rather than just taking cash all the time, they need to speak to an attorney, a business attorney. They need to speak to an accountant and really get those things settled, right, which will make their life, I think, a lot easier rather than just having a wad of cash in your pocket. What are the benefits of taking it to the next level?
It allows for legitimate growth. I mean, no one wants a letter from the IRS wondering where you came up with this money 5 years ago. But also, just in general, if you're going to scale the company, you need to be in a position to take in more and more money. For instance, you need to be able to take in credit card payments. That's the obvious thing. It's easy to set up a business through PayPal. Sometimes they hold on to the money for a couple of weeks, but I mean, PayPal is dependable. Other than that, there are various credit card companies that take credit cards online. But again, I mean, if you've never done this before, the whole thing can be difficult to navigate. But if you're going to scale the business, if you're going to set up a business that brings in a substantial cash flow and that you can live off of, you need to be able to do things like, how are we going to get the money? If you've moved beyond the taking cash stage, well, most people use credit cards now. Can you take credit cards? What are the tax benefits and problems of using credit cards? Using credit cards establishes a paper trail in a way that cash doesn't. But if no business is going to grow that much unless you start taking credit cards. But again, once people start out with a small business, they don't necessarily think in terms of, okay, how do I even take credit cards? You know, they may use Cash App or Venmo or Zelle, but that only works so far because all of those assume that the people actually have that money in their account. So if you're going to charge $3,000 for something, they need to have the $3,000. But with a credit card, they can put the $3,000 on the credit card. You get the money, and then they pay it off or not. I mean, that's their problem. Using credit cards is definitely a way to expand your reach. Bring in more money. In my opinion, a business is only becoming really serious once they start taking credit card payments. Also do with credit cards, you can set up consistent payments. You can do a monthly draw. If you have a client who you do work for every month, say, okay, you pay me $300 a month every month, then it just automatically comes out of the credit card account. You can set up monthly payments. And just, we live in an increasingly digital society. Credit card payments are, the present and the future. So until a business actually takes credit cards, they're not really in a position to grow, simply because not everyone is comfortable carrying around hundreds of dollars in cash. Checks are increasingly uncommon now. I mean, I haven't used a check in my business or received a check in several months. I mean, checks have their place, but I mean, you can't rely on people having access to checks. Credit cards is how most people buy things now. So if you're going to grow your business and stay in business and attract customers, you have to be in a position where they can pay you to actually do business with them. And credit cards is how most people do business these days.
Let's just say there's a guy out there who's starting a power washing business, some kind of like home services business. How does he receive credit card payments? What would he have to do to receive payments?
There are several different websites that do this. PayPal is the obvious one. You can set up a PayPal business account. It's not that difficult. Stripe is another major one. I would recommend going to those two first. I mean, like the disadvantage of taking credit cards is that the merchants will take a 2 or 3% fee of everything you get. That's a business expense. I mean, you can write that off your taxes. That's just life, and it's annoying, and you have to deal with it. But they're easy to set up. They're consistent. I mean, like, there aren't really problems with fraud with PayPal and Stripe. I mean, like, if someone, if you get their credit card information and swipe it, you'll get the money. I would recommend looking at those two, PayPal and Stripe, to begin with. Those are both good for businesses starting out. If you're a business that has a lot of weekly credit card payments, I would probably look to move to another company. But for someone just starting out, those two would fulfill almost all of the needs that one of the companies would have.